The left are trying to do everything that they possibly can to shut down GB News, and this is their next move. A report that is titled GB News, a snapshot of anti-Muslim hate, which was done by the Centre for Media Monitoring, which is owned by the Muslim Council for Britain. And this is the advert that they put out on X to advertise their report. Take a look.
A Muslim mayor.
British Muslims caused a stir.
Muslim countries.
Muslim stat.
Why? Because the worst thing you can do in British society is offend Islam.
You could be looking at the gradual Islamification of our country.
You saw that there. They called GB News a fine-tuned hate factory for having the guts to speak about Islam, for having the guts to speak about mass migration and what impact that might have on British Christian culture, for having the guts to talk about grooming gangs, for having the guts to talk about the backgrounds of terrorists. They are being labelled as this anti-Muslim channel, and this could have some very, very scary consequences, because this report, they've made it look all very professional, but it's a load of absolute garbage if you ask me. But it includes recommendations for Ofcom, demanding that Ofcom clamps down on GB News for their supposed anti-Muslim hatred. So let's have a look at what is in this absolutely ridiculous report. It's libelous, it's defamatory. I think it's absolutely appalling. So this report, which media outlet did they decide to hand it to? Of course, The Guardian are the people who had the first look at this report, because they knew The Guardian would give them the headline that they wanted, and oh boy did they deliver. This is what The Guardian had to say. GB News broadcasts half of all UK stories about Muslims, analysis shows. Oh really? 50% of every news story that GB News puts out is about Muslims, is it? What a load of absolute garbage. And let's have a look at the actual summary within the report and see what they had to say. So this is from the executive summary in the report. Let's have a look at what they have to say. GB News has an excessive, almost obsessive focus on Muslims. Really? And regularly demonises their beliefs and practices. Programmes rarely have Muslim contributors, and its stories about Islam and Muslims are overwhelmingly negative, more so than any other channel. Presenters and anchors have openly declared Muslims in general, and the number of Muslims in the UK in particular, to be a problem. I'm sorry, you might disagree with the fact that too many Muslims in the UK is a problem, but there are plenty of people who have concerns about the culture in the UK changing at such a dramatic rate. Okay? We have lots of different faiths and cultures in this country, but in order for this to say a culturally Christian country, you cannot have one new religion that is growing at an extremely fast pace, especially with mass migration, suddenly becoming far, far dominant than Christianity and all the other religions, if you care about maintaining that culture. Okay, that is a valid opinion. Okay, Islam is a set of beliefs. Okay, it's not a race. It's a set of beliefs. We do not want to get into the territory of blasphemy laws where you are not allowed to talk about it. GB News, this report talks about how much they talk about it compared to the other channels, Sky and the BBC. I say good. Good that there is a news channel out there that isn't so squeamish that they're scared to touch the subject. GB News actually has the guts to do it. Anyway, let's continue. GB News frequently portrays Muslims as a Trojan horse seeking to undermine British society and suggests that they are working to impose Sharia law on the UK. On that point, I do not think, having seen GB News' coverage, that they are suggesting that every Muslim in the UK is working together to impose Sharia law on Brits. However, there was actually a poll, I can't remember, what was it, the Henry Jackson Society, that was conducted amongst British Muslims, asking them their opinions of Hamas, asking them whether they would welcome Sharia law in this country, and various questions like this, and the results were actually pretty shocking. And channels like GB News, they've got the guts to cover it and ask that question of, are there a significant number of Muslims who would be in favour of Sharia law in this country? No one's expecting us to have Sharia law overnight in Britain. But it's fair that we ring the alarm bells when we see similar things happening in the UK to what was happening at the beginning in places like Iran before they ended up in a situation where they had Islamic laws and an Islamist extremist regime. So there's nothing wrong with talking about it. And this report makes makes everyone at GB News out to be some sort of hate preacher, which is really not the case. Presenter Patrick Christie stated that Muslims who want Sharia-compliant pensions are one step away from blasphemy laws, while former Sun editor Kelvin Mackenzie alleged that Muslims blindly do what they're told in the name of religion. GB News' consistent negative portrayal of Muslims risks inciting violence and discrimination against Muslim communities. Now, that line there of the report, I think, is very, very significant, because if you look at the people who have been chucked in prison for Facebook posts and for tweets during the riots and after the riots, it was people who posted tweets that were deemed to be inciting violence. So if you ask me, a lot of them were not inciting violence, and they were wrongly put behind bars or arrested or at the very least. And if you've got people saying that the content on GB News incites violence, that then becomes easily a matter for the police and a matter where arrests could potentially be made. So that is a very, very strong claim for them to make about GB News, suggesting that it risks inciting violence. Okay? Because that could end up with police, if people read this report and see, we can call this content that incites violence, that means we can report it to the police. You could have people calling up the police, reporting GB News, asking them to take action about things people have said on the channel. That would be very dangerous territory. So this report, although it seems absolutely laughable, the things that they have said, we do actually need to take this quite seriously. Because what they are doing here is they are really trying to shut down the channel. Okay, the claims they're making here are pretty big claims. The channel rarely features Muslim perspectives, and its presenters often fail to challenge Islamophobic remarks from guests, contributing to an unbalanced and biased narrative. Muslims are constantly exceptionalized in their place as citizens of the United Kingdom. Question. Okay. Now, they said GB News' consistent negative portrayal of Muslims. Oh, yes, we read that. The channel repeatedly propagates Islamophobic tropes, and it is hard to find many cases of Islam or Muslims being discussed without an Islamophobic trope being called upon, rather than providing an unbiased perspective and challenging guests on racism. Hang on. Here we have the typical thing which really annoys me, which is where they equate questioning a religion to racism. Okay, Islam is a set of ideas. It is not a race. Okay, I am English. If you want to criticize me for being English, if you want to criticize me for the color of my skin, maybe some remarks you could make could possibly be deemed racist. But if you criticize someone's religious beliefs, that is a criticism of a set of beliefs, not a criticism of a race. It is very, very different, and by blurring the two, you make it look as though criticizing a religion and their values is racism and is something that could be deemed illegal. It simply is not. Anyway, it goes on to say, rather than providing an unbiased perspective or challenging guests on racism, as one would expect from presenters at an Ofcom regulated broadcaster, hosts often indulge in diatribes and monologues dismissing Islamophobia or then blaming Muslims for Islamophobia. Still yet to see a proper definition of Islamophobia in the report, just as the Labour Party can't seem to define it themselves. Now, take a look at this last paragraph here at the end of the summary. This scale of anti-Muslim hatred on a major channel, ostensibly regulated by Ofcom, is a serious danger to our society. We do not expect any change given the combative attitude of GB News management and how they believe they are in the right. So, really, really strong words there. The scale of anti-Muslim hatred on the channel is a serious danger to our society. Very, very strong words. And notice the word danger. Notice the words saying GB News risks inciting violence. This is making the channel out as some kind of hate channel that is very dangerous and is going to lead to people fighting on the street and whatnot. It really is quite scary, the wording that they have used in this report, and I really worry that they are going to hand this report to Ofcom, and Ofcom are going to lap it all up and say, you know what, you're absolutely right, we're going to have to shut the channel down. That is the worry, ladies and gentlemen. Now, hilariously, Ofcom, as I'm sure you are all aware, has given GB News a pretty hard time, going after them way, way, way more than other broadcasters. I mean, they've slapped them with $100,000 fine for having Rishi Sunak on for that People's Channel event, which, if you ask me, was about as far from biased as can be. Yet the BBC, they get to breach their editorial guidelines when it came to the coverage of Hamas. And the war there in Gaza over 1,500 times, yet Ofcom do absolutely nothing about it and do not give a toss. But this report, hilariously, makes it out as if Ofcom is giving GB News a free pass, like it's not really regulating them, it's turning a blind eye to everything on the channel, and that they get an easier ride than Sky News and the BBC. I mean, what on earth? It could not be further from the truth. this is what scares me. Is these demands. This is from the director of the organisation, saying the volume of anti-Muslim hate on GB News and Ofcom's reluctance to regulate its harmful content has meant that politicians and commentators have been given carte blanche, I don't know if I pronounced that French right, to malign Muslims and Islam in a way that no other channel does. A robust regulator should demand that the channel performs according to long-established codes for broadcasters and enforce impartiality regulations. So, this could go two ways. Ofcom shuts down the channel and says, that's it, we've had enough. You guys, you can't, you've pushed it too far. You've broken the regulations too many times. That's it. GB News is off air. That's the serious option, okay? But the less serious option, but still very, very scary, is that now GB News will end up having to self-censor. Ofcom will come to them and say, you guys need to stop the anti-Muslim hate. You guys need to stop mentioning Muslims on your channel. Stop mentioning grooming gangs. Stop mentioning terrorists. Stop mentioning issues with Muslim gangs causing violence and abusing young girls. You cannot do that anymore. Okay? And that's quite scary, that prospect. Okay, because then GB News will not be able to mention the issues which are very, very important to Brits. So I'm quite worried about what is going to happen after this. Even if Ofcom do not come after them seriously, I wouldn't be surprised if there actually is an effort to self-censor because they're so terrified of being shut down by Ofcom. So this is scary, scary stuff. And in the report, we have this key findings page where they try to make it look like this is, very accurate data by putting in a load of statistics, which are a load of garbage, by the way. Talking about how many times we mentioned the word two-tier compared to other channels. Coverage of the riots, you see that 62% there. During the summer riots, GB News repeatedly framed Muslims as perpetrators rather than victims of violence. And when it came to the riots, one thing GB News were making the effort to do was not make the riots out as something that was all about far-right racists, as Keir Starmer and the other mainstream press wanted to make it out to be. They were, I think they were the only channel, at least one of the only channels to actively cover, I'm just going to show you an example here, of that pub in Birmingham, where a gang came for a white bloke at the pub. Mainstream media did not want to cover that, okay? You had counter-protesters coming and terrorising, normal Brits. This was just, some guy at the pub. Take a look at this. So there you have these counter-protesters that turned up to a protest that wasn't happening, and there's for no reason, look, they're starting on this guy. Okay, so that video there, we saw it all over Twitter, but most of the mainstream outlets were too scared to cover it. GB News, they covered it. In fact, they went there in person and reported on it and spoke to the pub owners and pub goers there about the experience they had there. Now, that was not a group of white British men descending on the pub there, okay? I think we can... Obviously, we don't know the exact faith and whatnot of those people there, but just by covering that, people are like, oh, you know, it's the Muslim hating channel. And then the other thing, if we look at that misleading information box, I just want to zoom in on that. They're in trouble for talking about the grooming gangs. How dare they expose the grooming gang crisis that has, you know, led to so many young girls being abused and gang raped in this country. It's absolutely horrifying, and GB News had the guts to cover it when other people were scared to do so. But this report, it says the channel regularly misleads the audience about Muslims, from outright lies to misrepresented and uncontextualized claims about so-called grooming gangs, Sharia law, mosques and incubators of extremism and cultural difference, cherry-picking stories and evidence. I mean, that just absolutely infuriates me that they are in trouble for covering the grooming gangs. I think that the way that they have covered the grooming gangs, they've made a huge effort to get a heck of a lot of evidence, speak to survivors, speak to people on the ground who have been massively involved in this, and you know they've done a very extensive job of making sure all the information about them is covered properly. Yet apparently outright lies, misrepresented and uncontextualized claims, that's the way that it's being presented. I mean, just absolutely unbelievable. And I don't want it to be the case that Ofcom come and clamp down on GB News after this report and say, sorry, no more covering the grooming gangs, that's Islamophobic. Just unbelievable. Now, GB News, they have responded to what is going on. And GB News say this inaccurate and defamatory report is nothing more than a cynical, self-serving attempt to silence free speech. It proves exactly why a news organisation like GB News needs to exist and why it is succeeding. We are concerned that at no point did this project of the Muslim Council of Britain contact GB News or its presenters to allow them to respond to these highly defamatory allegations. So that's really awful as well, that after making these claims, they didn't even allow them to respond. If you look through the report, you'll see that they've put screenshots in there of specific presenters and specific shows, quoted specific presenters. They haven't even gone to those presenters and given them a chance to say their side of the story. Now, that article from The Guardian, Leo Kearse, who is one of the GB News presenters, he shared this, and this is what he's had to say. Blatant Islamophobia from The Guardian. GB News reports on grooming gangs, terrorists and criminals. According to The Guardian and the Centre for Media Management, is that what they call it? Centre for Media Management. This equates to all Muslims. What an odd thing to say. I mean, you know, that headline from The Guardian is just absolutely diabolical, to say half of all UK stories are about Muslims. Okay, so GB News, they cover the illegal migration problem a lot. I'm sure any time that GB News has brought up illegal migration, probably even if they haven't spoken about the the dominant religion of people coming across on boats, they've probably counted that as a story about Muslims. I mean, this is such a misleading headline, and I know that news organisations, in order to get their clicks, they have to put clickbaity titles, whatever, fine, but that is just absolutely misleading and defamatory, and I hope that they put pressure on The Guardian to take that title down, to edit it, because that is just completely not representative of what is actually in the report itself. So this is pretty scary stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, we've had GB News respond to it. It could be the case that everyone just says this is a load of nonsense, we're not going to bother looking at it, and nobody takes it seriously. But I'm quite concerned that Ofcom could take this report quite seriously. Ofcom is probably salty that GB News is going to be taking them to court to challenge this 100 grand fine that they have been slapped with for the Rishi Sunak People's Channel event. I think that Ofcom, they could, they've clearly got on a vendetta. They're clearly on a vendetta against GB News. I wouldn't be surprised if they're happy to use this as an excuse to try and shut the channel down, or at the very least to put a heck of a lot of pressure on them to not cover stories about mass migration, the impacts on British culture. And the culturally Christian country that we live in. They will scare them into not covering the grooming gangs anymore, and this sort of thing. So this report, we'll see what happens. We'll see if Ofcom, if we get a response from them. I think at the moment we don't have anything from them, but this is quite terrifying, and we cannot allow these people to control what our news outlets are able to cover. This is scary territory, guys. Let's keep a look over the next few days and see how and if Ofcom responds to this. Fingers crossed it's not going to result in the channel being brought down, but we should be worried. We should be worried. More important than ever to watch the channel and support it, and show the regulators that this is something that people want to watch. Anyway, I'm Chloe Dobbs. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Still watching? Well, I've got a quick ask for you. Recent UK, we're fighting the woke brigade and inspiring young Brits, but we need your help to go bigger. We're hosting a fundraiser and would love you to sign up and share the link on the big day. It's easy, it makes a massive impact, and there are prizes for top fundraisers. Click the Google form in the description to join us. Cheers very much. Let's keep going together.